Welcome to Everything is Everything. I'm Amit and this is my good friend Ajay. And my good friend Ajay has been facing a little bit of a difficulty in recent times. My good friend Ajay went to a conference recently and three different people came to him and called him Amit. And then Ajay was pretty perturbed by that and he messaged me and said, "Do people call you Ajay?" And no one's ever called me Ajay. So I said, "No, bro, never happened to me. Must be something with you." Though I must confess that if you really think about it, I do kind of look like an Amit. And you do kind of look much more like an Ajay, though what you look most like is an Narendra. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk about nuclear power and how to think about it. Now, we have done a fantastic episode on power, and I say fantastic even though, it's not actually an act of vanity. It was a masterclass delivered by you on how we should think about the power sector and the future of electricity, and I absolutely loved that episode. And at the end of that episode, you allowed me to go on a little rant about nuclear energy, which I absolutely support and wholeheartedly want more of, and both of us are agreed on that. So, I'll kind of repeat what my rant there was about. I'll also link to a great piece co-written by Steven Pinker in the New York Times, which lays out some of the data I'm about to give you here. But net, here's the thing. Nuclear energy is the safest form of energy known to man, right? People will often point to the three accidents that have happened: Three Mile Island in 1979, Fukushima in 2011, Chernobyl in 86, right? And the thing with all of those is the Three Mile Island nuclear accident killed no one. Fukushima killed no one because of the nuclear mishap. People died because of the tsunami and a hurried evacuation of that place. And Chernobyl, yes, it did kill people. The actual numbers are disputed. Direct deaths are small, but many people got cancer. Even if you take the most negative estimate of how many people died in Chernobyl, it still remains a fact that in 60 years of nuclear energy, less people have died than in a month of coal accidents or accidents related to coal, right? If you look at the rest of the energy landscape, hydrocarbon, coal, etc., there's a lot of, danger there, a lot of deaths being caused by them, which we don't even take into account. Now, people often make the mistake of thinking that, oh, nuclear energy, nuclear bombs, they have the word nuclear, there must be some issue there. We know that not to be the case. There are 24 countries in the world which have nuclear power, but they haven't built nuclear bombs. These are completely separate things. For some reason, in the 70s, in the peace movement, environmental movement, they got conflated. And how ideological tribes form is that they will take a package of dogmatic assertions and then they will stick to the entire package. You're not allowed to dissent, even if the facts change and even if you, get to know the other side of the story. So the thing with nuclear energy is, if you look at the history of the world with nuclear energy, Germany adopted it, but surprisingly and really sadly took a U-turn and suffered for it. France has been a wholesale adopter of nuclear energy. 71% of France is powered by nuclear energy, and their per capita emission of carbon dioxide, that is the amount of carbon dioxide plus per 10 megawatts or whatever, is one-tenth the rest of the world. There have been no safety issues. They've brought costs down dramatically. And as far as climate change is concerned, the impact is so miraculous that I simply wonder why people don't take nuclear much more seriously. Yet, there are these hidebound attitudes that, oh, nuclear is dangerous, it's not safe. What will happen to nuclear waste? 60 years of nuclear waste could fit in an underground bunker the size of Walmart. These are really not issues anymore. But we grow up with this dark sort of cloud hanging over nuclear. And the facts are, completely different.
So, Amit, today I want us to walk the full story of the case for nuclear electricity, what has gone wrong worldwide, what are the reasons for optimism that we see today, and then turn to an Indian environment, that what are the 5 things that need to be get done. And gentle reader, all this work that I'm reporting is joint with my co-author Akshay Jetli. You see his photograph here. Do you see his photograph here?
And he's run a great episode of The Seen and the Unseen with me.
And he and I did a Seen and the Unseen episode with Amit when we got our first paper out. Okay, so Akshay is co-author of everything that happens today. Okay, so let's get started at nuclear energy. Worldwide, nuclear energy has been a disappointment. If you stood in 1945, the mood was of boundless optimism that we're going to crack this, that we figured out the whole thing, and there's going to be endless free energy. In practice, what has happened is that nuclear energy has proved to be extremely capital intensive, partly because the equipment is expensive, partly because of delays in construction. It takes 20 years to build a modern, large scale nuclear plant of maybe 2000 or 4000 megawatts. And when you just add up all the economics, it looks terrible. So it's not been a compelling case for investments in nuclear. And then, of course, you correctly said the whole fear around 3 Mile Island, and then Chernobyl, and then Fukushima. When Chernobyl happened, for a lot of people, you could rationalize it in a reasonable extent, saying, oh, that's the Soviet Union. Okay, that's just the monumental stupidity and systemic failure of the Soviet Union, that authoritarian systems make people stupid and they make mistakes. And I think there's an HBO series called Chernobyl.
There's a series, there's also a great book by Adam Higginbotham on Chernobyl, which kind of lays out, it's a textbook sort of delineation of how a big oppressive state inevitably fails, nothing to do with nuclear power.
So after 86, for some time, there was hope that, look, yes, Chernobyl was a terrible disaster, but it's a fault of the Soviet Union. That, if you can run a normal civilized society, you can be a liberal democracy, then human beings will not be so distorted, and there will be better check and balance. People will start noticing things are wrong and better decisions will be made. So the entire decision failure in Chernobyl, in an oppressive context where people were afraid of being sent to Siberia, so they just kept on making the wrong decisions. It was felt that, okay, Chernobyl happened to the Soviet Union, but if you can be a decent liberal democracy where human beings can make better decisions under conditions of freedom, then it's not so bad. And then came Fukushima. In 2011, the Fukushima accident was just a real disaster. And I remember a priceless moment which really shook me also, which was that Angela Merkel, who was the head of state of Germany, called a meeting after the Fukushima disaster around the following sentence. She said, the Japanese are as good as us. So, if a nuclear accident happened there, can it happen here? And note, she is no pushover. She is a PhD in chemistry. She's a very smart person. So, she's not like one of the less literate politicians and heads of state. She was a scientific mind with full ability to understand the complexities of nuclear energy and also to engage in probabilistic reasoning. But the logic in Germany was very simple, that we are not better engineers than the Japanese. We are better engineers than the Soviets. So, something stupid happens in Russia, in China, fine. Like, those are second rate countries with bad political systems. But Japan is as good as Germany. So if an accident could happen in Japan, could it happen in Germany? And there was a great deal of torment around this question. And we know in hindsight that a decision was taken in Germany to shut down all nuclear energy at the time. And I think starting in 2024, that was not such a great decision. And the main body of our episode today is going to talk about why. But this is the crisis of nuclear energy, that in a way a boundless source of energy, in a way an economic failure, that when you do hard dollars and cents calculations, the NPV doesn't look great. And then there is the looming problem of safety. And it is our main contention. Amit and I and Akshay argue that these problems have been largely solved or are within reach of being solved. So we are in for a happy world of better safety and better pricing. So all of us should bring this back into our reasoning.
So tell me more. Tell me about the safety angle. Why did those three disasters happen?
When you go to first principles reasoning around these important nuclear disasters, there are three things going on. The first is that there are radioactive materials, and it's a different game compared to the normal materials that we deal with in everyday life. We are not used to the complexities of radioactive materials. Release of radioactive gas into the air will travel for thousands of kilometers, will come down as radioactive rain. Okay, it will trigger off birth defects in children. So, it's a different kettle of fish that we've got to figure out. The second problem is the issues around a chain reaction, that there is such a thing as a chain reaction, and that's what happens in a nuclear bomb. And if you don't do the correct things, then potentially there can be a chain reaction. And so you get a runaway reaction where the nuclear material heats up and the reaction goes faster, and it becomes super hot, and it digs a hole into the ground where it literally melts the ground, and it goes hundreds of meters into the ground. It can contaminate groundwater, it can reach rivers. So there is a very genuine thing of the way in which the failure process of a nuclear reactor can lead to a chain reaction. And the third problem is called complex systems reasoning, that it is a deep insight about the world that nonlinear interactions are a new problem. So you don't have a simple causality, you have a complex system where many pieces are interacting, and then there can be unpredictable events that will come. Also, the way in which a human error will magnify and turn into something much bigger is far more dangerous in that complex system setting. So these are sort of the three elements that have come together to create safety issues. Now, in response, I would make the following list of arguments. The first is your argument, saying with all these difficulties, let us sit and count the impact on excess mortality of 60 years of nuclear energy, and the numbers are actually modest, and there is no question that the killer is coal. The killer is coal, and you haven't even started counting climate change yet. With coal, coal mining is hazardous. Uh, the burning of coal releases horrible gases into the air over and beyond carbon dioxide, and the industrial safety record of coal and coal related industries is pretty bad. So with all these three problems on the table, nuclear is safer than coal. So if you think that it's not an abstract decision, we will add nuclear risk to the world. We will add nuclear risk to the world, and we will reduce coal risk in the world. So coal is the dirtiest of all energy sources, both in terms of pollution, in terms of carbon dioxide, in terms of safety, in terms of deaths. Coal is the nightmare, and you got to fight coal. And then you have to think in terms of excess deaths per megawatt hour, and then nuclear wins. Okay, so you have to renormalize it. There is a very large coal industry, there are a very large number of deaths. This is intuitively similar to the probabilistic reasoning that would happen around driving a car from Bombay to Delhi versus taking a plane from Bombay to Delhi. Yes, plane crashes are big spectacular events, they make headlines, but honestly, if you count the death rate of getting from Bombay to Delhi, it is like 1/10 or 1/50th of the death rate of driving from Bombay to Delhi. So it's the same kind of problem, that a car accident doesn't make headlines, a plane accident makes headlines, and that is messing with our ability to do probabilistic reasoning. This is the first reason why we should not be as scared about nuclear energy, even though there are those three peculiar problems. The second is that this doesn't, the fact that these three problems are there doesn't mean that they are inexorably there. There is human ingenuity. So I want to take you back. 1965, Ralph Nader wrote a famous book, Unsafe at Any Speed, where he documented the safety difficulties of cars in the United States at the time. Now, that doesn't mean we stand still. In fact, revolutionary gains were obtained in the safety of cars after that period. And it is not beyond the dint of man to think about these problems and solve them. Most notably, on the question of a runaway nuclear reaction, there are many improved reactor designs where when a safety incident happens, the reactor just spontaneously shuts itself down. That forces like gravity come into play, and they pull the fissile material apart, so there can be no question of a runaway chain reaction. This is the heart of the idea, that it's about clever engineering. It's, yeah, you face a problem, that doesn't mean you stop. It means you try harder. And already over the last 50 years, so many good innovations have come. The 1979 Three Mile Island reactor, the 1986 Chernobyl reactor, and the Fukushima 2011 reactor. These were all first generation designs. These were very old designs at a time when humankind was just about starting to figure out this. By today, the brain power that is available is way beyond that. We are understanding these things deeply, and I think we have to respect human ingenuity, that the safety problem is not a given. It is a matter of fighting with it and thinking about it and getting better. Now, in fact, we have already got evidence about a large number of nuclear reactors who have worked at ridiculously perfect levels of safety characteristics. These are the nuclear reactors that are used on aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines. Okay, so aircraft carriers are ridiculously power hungry things, and there's no way to make a modern aircraft carrier without putting a nuclear reactor there. All modern aircraft carriers have nuclear reactors on board, and these have been running for decades. They've never had a safety incident. So this is really testimony that this thing is real. It's not just a hypothetical possibility. And then of course nuclear submarines. There is no way to run a modern submarine without a nuclear reactor on board. All modern submarines have a nuclear reactor on board, and they work very well. The safety characteristics have been excellent. Again, you got to keep the Soviet Union out. So the Soviet Union never really figured out how to make an aircraft carrier, how to make a submarine. That's just, you know, Soviet Union. But once you come to advanced economies and the engineering capabilities of an advanced economy and the freedom of speech, the ability to dissent and debate and criticize, then you actually get great gains. So I'm not just making a hypothetical statement that nuclear energy can be safe. With aircraft carriers and with nuclear submarines, we have thousands and thousands of man hours of flawless operation happening every year on a large scale across many countries all over the world. So this thing can be done. So I'd just like to say to all of us that let's not start with a very hostile approach to nuclear energy. Let's look at the evidence and let's debate that, yes, there are problems and we should argue about them. Everything has problems. Coal has problems, cars have problems. Okay. The internet has created lots of unintended effects. That doesn't mean you run away from the technology. It means you figure out how to make it better.
And I want to add to your point that not only do we know that using nuclear energy doesn't kill as many people as you think it would, like, 60 years of it is equal to 1 month of coal. I also want to say that not using nuclear energy can cost you lives. You pointed out just before we started recording that what happened in Fukushima was that deaths happened because they shut down the reactor and they shifted to coal, and there were deaths because of that. So actually, it wasn't the nuclear energy per se or that accident that caused deaths. It was then stopping to use it, getting carried away, that caused further deaths. Similarly, you spoke about, flying versus driving. And I remember this vague fact that I heard that after 9/11, when security measures went up and people were also scared, they started driving more and flying less. And because of that, mortality went up. Because obviously, more people die in car accidents than they do in plane crashes by an order of magnitude, right? So, you also have to think of the opportunity costs, that it is not just about, oh, if we use nuclear power, it won't be dangerous. I will argue that not using nuclear power is dangerous and is costing you lives.
And if you care about the warming world and carbon dioxide emissions, this is really one of the great options alongside solar and wind. So solar is great, wind is great, and nuclear is great. I don't like a simple environmentalist view that solar is good and wind is good, but nuclear is to be proscribed.
In fact, there's tremendous cognitive dissonance there. There is tons that is wrong with the modern environmental movement, but one of them is a cognitive dissonance. That you want to solve climate change, you think it's one of the great problems of our times, which it is. Nuclear energy is something that then you should wholeheartedly support. The data is all in favor of that, and it's just irrational to not do so.
Okay, and now the next problem that we should think about is cost. It is true that when you think of the delays and the capital cost of building conventional large nuclear energy plants worldwide, it is just nuts. And modern solar, modern wind, modern lithium ion batteries, and other clever batteries just blow it out of the water. I get that criticism, and we should not be dogmatic. We should look at it, we should recognize. But the solution lies in some very different things. And all the great stories of the world begin at the Second World War. So I'm going to fly back to 1941 and tell you a story. In 1941, the Battle of the Atlantic was taking place. And the essence was that German submarines, the so called U boats, were shooting down the ships that were coming into Britain from America, carrying food and military supplies and everything. This Britain was an island, and if you could cut off the connectivity of Britain to America, then you would basically strangle the ability of the British to resist. So the Germans knew this strategy. They had kind of begun this in the First World War as well, and this was being done at a completely different scale in the Second World War. It's one of the great stories, gentle reader. I encourage you, just go study the Battle of the Atlantic. It's not adequately noticed by many people. It's a fabulous story. It's one of the most interesting stories of the Second World War, about how ingenuity, effort, imagination, creativity came together, and the Allies won the Battle of the Atlantic. They basically blasted their way through the Atlantic and got uninterrupted passage. There were many, many elements in that story. Maybe we should make an EIE episode on that story. But one element of that was the idea that the Germans were shooting transports out of the water. Okay, so imagine there's a transport ship carrying food, carrying weapons, and the German submarines were destroying those ships. And it started becoming a problem that how many ships do you have? Because hundreds of ships were getting killed. Okay, so just pause to think of a world where hundreds of ships were getting killed.
There's a Bob Dylan song about this. How many ships must a sub shoot down?
How many ships must a sub shoot down before the British have no food? Okay, and this was a crisis and it had to be solved. And the glory of that period was that they decided to go for broke in solving it. So there was a British design of a transport ship, which is affectionately called the Ugly Duckling. It's basically a mediocre, stupid ship with about 10,000 tons of displacement. And they came up with the idea, the Americans came up with the idea that we will mass produce this on an assembly line. This had never before been done. Ships were artisanal projects. You would build a ship. Okay, so a bunch of people would come together and bit by bit they would put all the pieces together. It becomes a ship and you would launch it, and each ship would be different because it's being done at an artisanal scale. I said, no, we're going to do Henry Ford style assembly line manufacturing for these ships. And this was done at 18 shipyards. Assembly lines were built to roll out ships. And what you get out of this is the gains from industrialization, also very importantly, the gains from learning. As you do this over and over, the processes get better. So at the beginning of this journey, it took 270 days to commission a ship. At the end of this journey, it took 35 days. So at the end of this journey, in 35 days from start to finish, you were rolling a ship into the sea. And a total of 2,700 ships were built. Okay, and it gave a crash in the price in ways that is difficult to estimate and make comparable, but it gave a huge reduction in the price as well. So their approach to the Germans was, yeah, you keep shooting down our ships, we'll make even more of the ships. Okay, that mighty American manufacturing was bigger than any submarines that Germany could put into the sea. Similarly, there is a story around tanks. The German Tiger tank was a great tank, but it was an artisanal product. Here's a fundamental fact around the Tiger tank. Every 11 Tiger tanks that were produced, there would be a change in the design because the people making those tanks were master craftsmen. And that's dumb. It drives up the cost. What you want is an assembly line. You make a factory and you just mass produce this. And this was done by the Americans with the Sherman tanks, and they taught the Soviets how to do this with the T-34s, and they just like blew away German manufacturing by 10x. So let's apply these thoughts and these principles to nuclear reactors. How do you get the price of a nuclear reactor down? The answer is industrialization. How do you do mass production? And can you produce a large unit quantity? And this straight away encourages us to think smaller. That if you're going to make a 4,000 megawatt reactor, you'll probably only make a handful of them. So it's very cute that wow, we have a single reactor that makes 4,000 megawatts, but you won't be able to industrialize it. Whereas if you come down to 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts, now you can think of making 1,000 of them or making 10,000 of them. And then we'll get scale economies because every component in that will be mass produced. It won't be weird artisanal components going into the reactor. And everybody's dream is we will bloody have an assembly line which will mass produce these reactors. Okay, and then the kind of cost savings that we're going to get will really surprise all of us. So I think this is the end run around the problem of nuclear and cost. Now related to this, this is what is called the small modular reactor, SMR. Related to this is the problem of the construction projects, and it takes many decades to build a large nuclear plant. Well, the dream with the SMR, it's the size of a big truck and it's fully self-contained. So you just go buy an SMR off the shelf from DMart and you will plop it in your backyard and you've got a nuclear reactor up and running. Okay, that's the dream. So you just have no concept of construction costs because You just buy a prefab ready SMR, which is about the size of a big truck. So think 30% bigger than the biggest truck is a 50 megawatt or a 100 megawatt plant. And it just comes in a crate and it gets placed on site, and you throw a switch and it starts generating. There's no multi-year process for constructing a nuclear plant. Okay, this becomes like a captive genset. So imagine lots of companies in India have a diesel genset. Okay, so imagine how we do that. We buy the diesel generator, we put it in a corner of a factory, we place it there, we throw a switch. That's how we should have SMRs working. That really there is no complexity in terms of the construction of a large complex nuclear plant. You just buy these modules and you scale up the manufacturing, you get economies of scale. While I'm on this subject, a very important secret of the cost collapse of solar. Solar energy has had one of the greatest cost collapses of world history, in some ways even better than CPUs. Why did that happen? Because there are exactly two steps in solar manufacturing. You have to make polycrystalline silicon, polysilicon, which is a scale business. There are only 10 factories in the world who do this at scale. So you just ramp up the scale and the perfection of the manufacturing process. It's not fiddly, it's not artisanal. So you get a cost crash there. And then you cut the polysilicon and put it into a simple semiconductor manufacturing process to get the solar panels. Once again, a simple dumb process, do it on an industrial scale, that's how you get the costs down. So it is manufacturing that drove the cost reduction of solar, and if there is to be any future in nuclear, it will come because of manufacturing that will crash prices of SMRs. That is my opinion of where this goes.
You know, Ajay, I think of you as, in a sense, an artisan, right? And therefore, it is like this is an artisanal show. We are both artisans, if not artists. We can have, delusions about that. And so it's almost kind of ironic that you're saying that when it comes to all of these important things, don't do things the artisanal way. Let's industrialize and all that. Couple of really newbie questions about these modular nuclear reactors. Number one, explain to me what is 50 watts. Bring it alive for me. How much can 50 watts power? Like, can I, for example, get a small modular nuclear reactor and that 50 watts, will it power a neighborhood, for example, or a suburb, or what is the scale?
So roughly speaking, the energy consumption of one household is about 2-3,000 watts. Okay, just between friends, I'm going to call it 1,000
Daily or yearly or?
at an instant in time.
Okay.
Okay, so
Hmm.
at every instant in time, to fire up one air conditioner and 15 appliances is about 2,000 watts. Okay, and I'm going to round that to 1,000 because, to do good oral calculations, we don't want pesky little details. So 1 megawatt, 1 million watts is 1,000 households. 50 megawatts is 50,000 households. But now knock out that 2 because I was doing the approximations. So it's about 25,000 households. So a village with 25,000 households would be served by one 50 megawatt plant. Or 50 megawatt is a good factory. So a large number of factories in the world, one 50 megawatt plant would run the entire factory with some energy left over to sell back to the grid.
So basically, not Andheri size, maybe Versova size, definitely Yari Road side size. So you're getting that done. And the other aspect of it is that once you get this modular thing, and I'm assuming these are totally safe, new gen reactors, all of that isn't an issue. But how do you get to connect it up to the rest of the neighborhood? Let us say that I buy it for the area where I live, which is four bungalows in Andheri, and there's been a catastrophe, the state has failed us, no other power is working. But that invisible infrastructure, as it were, of getting connectivity to all the households, how complex is that? And I'm guessing it is super easy for a big company to do it.
This is indeed a huge issue. The Seen and the Unseen episode that Akshay and I did with you is centered around that. There is a magic that is called the grid. Okay, a whole bunch of different producers of electricity come into the grid, and all the grid connects up to a large number of users of electricity, both commercial and residential, and the grid is supposed to do all the transportation. So think of the transmission system and the distribution system like big highways and then small patli gullies in Warsaw. Okay, that all that is the grid. It's a system for moving energy around. In India, that is significantly broken in many states because of the way the public sector grid has operated. That will indeed be a choke point. For this reason, a lot of the solar and wind and potentially nuclear innovation is happening and will happen at a B2B scale. That it's a big business that sets up a solar or a wind or a nuclear facility, either for captive consumption or to sell to another big business. But getting it out into the grid has proved to be problematic because the foundations of Indian electricity policy are broken and the grid doesn't work too well. That's a separate debate which we should do, and I think we began that in the Seen and the Unseen with Akshay. So the future of the grid is another lovely story, but right now I'm just going to pretend we are focusing on generation technologies.
So Ajay, what's the Indian story? What is India's relationship with thinking about nuclear power in general?
So just like in space research, the assumption in India was that if this stuff is going to be done, it can only be done, it will only be done by the government. Okay, and if you look back at 1945 and 1955, it's debatable even at that point. But by today, these are very wrong propositions. Now, there is a mix here between nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, and we should decouple the two. Okay, so you use steel to make guns, you use steel to make artillery shells. That's a defense business. And there you need a defense mindset where you will worry about strategic autonomy and having your own supply chain where you are not vulnerable to others and so on. But when you come to energy, then you'll be a normal part of globalization that you're buying good equipment from everywhere in the world. So Bharat Heavy Electricals makes generation equipment, but it's not a monopoly, and imported equipment competes with that. And there is very good coal and gas fired generation equipment that is being imported from other places in the world, and it's fine that you don't need a public sector monopoly anymore. So, our problem in the nuclear business is we tend to assume that everything shall be Department of Atomic Energy. And in the time of Homi Bhabha, there was a different kind of ethos and excitement around it. And all credit to the Indian nuclear science establishment that they got to the testing of a nuclear bomb in 1974. That was quite an achievement. And this was done without any proliferation. India is one of the few countries which figured this out entirely alone. Whereas in most of the other nuclear powers, somebody or the other leaked information to them. So the Soviets stole nuclear secrets from the Manhattan projects. The Soviets proliferated to the Chinese proliferated to the North Koreans and the Pakistanis, and so on. But in India, this was figured out from scratch to a nuclear test in 1974. This is the glory days of Homi Bhabha and Raja Ramanna and Setna and all those people. More power to them. But building efficient, cheap nuclear energy is a different problem. It's more analogous to Bharat Heavy Electricals, that how do you operate in a normal industrial problem and get to scale and unit economics? This is not something that fits well in the Indian state. So I feel a huge change is required in our minds, where I am going to describe some role of the state, where the government is required in some pieces of the nuclear energy problem based on market failure type reasoning. But other than that, we don't require the government to be central to this story. So, L&T as a private company should wonder, should we be making SMR reactors and competing in the world market? Or Hindalco as an aluminum company should be wondering that should I be buying a French SMR reactor because it's a cost efficient way to make energy. It should leave the subject of government and it should become a subject of private decision making. And there is some role for the state, and we'll describe that in a moment. So I'm saying this in three different ways. It is congenitally not possible for the Indian state to do anything efficiently. So if you want to get into business, it's a mistake to put the Indian state into any business activity. Okay, so for example, we talked about digital public goods and UPI, and I shake my head that really you want a public sector company to do a high tech business? Like surely the private sector will do this better. The energy, the competition of multiple private players will do this better. It's that same spirit here that building nuclear reactors is a business. It's a normal private business with some interplay with the government, and we'll come to that in a moment. Operating a nuclear reactor and generating energy is a business. It's for BSES, oh, it's called Reliance Energy. It's for Reliance Energy or Tata Power to choose that do we want to buy a nuclear generating station. That's their legitimate private business. Or you have completely captive that I'm an aluminum company. Do I want to buy a nuclear reactor as a low cost captive source of energy? These are all private decisions. So the big thing we've got to get out of in India is this idea that the government is going to do everything. And frankly, the government thing has not worked. The government approach has not worked. The share of nuclear energy in Indian energy consumption is minuscule. It has not grown over the years. And I remember when I was in the Ministry of Finance, I had started on some early calculations that this isn't going anywhere. There is just no way in which the Indian correctly measured cost of government nuclear energy plants plays a meaningful role in the Indian energy mix because the efficiency is not there. And at the time, it was so clear that when you go to the French, when you go to the Americans, the top of the line reactors are very, very cost efficient compared with what happens here.
And you mentioned that, Tata Power and Reliance Power should have the freedom to, get nuclear reactors if they want, to plug into their systems. And gentle readers, a lot of you would then instinctively immediately think that, oh, the government has to regulate that because what about safety? And I'm thinking that if the government actually had to regulate it because of safety concerns, they would immediately mandate that they get nuclear power because it is far safer than any other kind of power in use now. And of course, you and I believe that the government should not mandate that, let the forces play out and we will get there anyway. And since you mentioned Homi Baba, I'd also like to recommend this excellent book, mid episode recommendation, Atomic State by Janvi Falke. Wonderful book that actually has a narrative about these early pioneers of nuclear energy in India. She's also got a great episode with me on the Seen and the Unseen, which is called Janvi and the Cyclotron, and a delightful conversation where we spoke about much other than nuclear power. We spent a fair bit of time speaking about Patti Smith and Robert Mapplethorpe, who have in fact been compared to our crew, Namsita Harita Shah and Vaishnav Vyas, as these photographs will indicate. Is there a similarity or not? I leave it to you to decide, gentle readers. So, Ajay, what is your dream for how this goes?
So in the dream, we have multiple foreign firms making nuclear reactors. Maybe after 5, 10, 20 years, Indian engineering firms also making nuclear reactors entirely private. Private buyers either in the electricity business or in other high energy consuming operations choosing that is this efficient. Now, when you come to the choosing, it boils down to solar, wind, storage versus nuclear. Okay, so our previous episode on the future of electricity showed this beautiful tension that in the daytime while the sun is shining in India, solar energy is a fabulous low cost resource, and you really can't compete with the price of solar while the sun is shining. But the sun has an unpleasant habit of setting every evening, and so every evening you have a crisis that there is a collapse in energy supply, and that happens to precisely be the time at which human consumption of energy goes up. People go back home and they flick on their TVs and their air conditioners and their mixers and so on. They open the refrigerator and the refrigerator warms up and that triggers the compressor to come back on and so on. So without nuclear in the picture, there would be a price surge in the evening, and that price surge would require storage. And the equilibrium would be one where the cost of storage is counterbalanced against the price premium. Now, suppose you are a speculator and you believe that, look, the storage technology is not good enough, we're going to have an insane price surge in the evening. Okay, because all the coal is on its way out. Okay, in the dream, we will shut down all the coal fired plants of India. We will close down all coal mines in India. Okay, that's the dream. So, in the evening, there would be a real crisis every day because the wind would continue to work, but the solar would shut down. And our storage technology is strong enough to curtail the evening price surge is the question. Suppose you're a speculator and you believe that no, this is nuts, that there is no way in which storage technologies are good enough. Then you will think nuclear technology. This is the business bet that private people have to make. That either you believe that, wow, there's going to be a crazy peak, but storage is going to work. Great. By all means, go build storage plants based on your speculative view. No central planning, no government telling you that I want a storage plant here. You're making a storage plant because you believe you will make money filling up the storage plant in the daytime with with cheap solar energy, and selling in the evening peak at a very good price. Or you believe that all the storage technologies will not suffice to solve the evening peak. Then you say, you know what, let's make nuclear, because nuclear will work into the evening and we will get a lot of money by selling nuclear energy in the evening, and these will be private decisions. So that's the dream.
So, Ajay, you spoke about the sun setting, and I want to tell you कि sir, sunset नहीं हो रहा है, हम घूम रहे हैं. So, Ajay, I must commend you on your timing because you wrote a fantastic article on this with Akshay Jetli, and that article came out in the same week practically that Meta, aka Facebook, and Google placed big orders for small modular reactors. So we are beyond the world of theory. Shit is happening. Orders have been placed for them. And when big players like these get into the business, you can bet that things are going to happen, that scale is possible, and this is something we should think about seriously. So give me your sense of how should we think about it here in India? How should the state think about it? How should individuals think about it?
Um, the Indian state needs to work on 5 problems. Okay, so the first problem is establish the ability of private Indian people to make a decision to import a nuclear plant. Okay, I don't even know what are all the logjam of import restrictions or government monopoly, or who knows what is the legal system and what are the intrusions coming in from the legal system. But principle one, private people should be free, and it should be a private decision based on business considerations. That does it make sense for me to buy a 50 megawatt plant or not? I believe a 50 megawatt plant is about 2 to 300 million dollars, which is like 1500 to 2500 crore rupees, which is a feasible decision for the corporate financial power of the top 100 companies of India. Okay, so they should choose, and that's idea number one. Idea number two, if you try to go to a Indian distribution company, the grid, and say to them that buy my nuclear energy, or that the DISCOM should build a nuclear plant, the DISCOMs are generally not interested. They think this is too expensive. They think this is too capital intensive. Now we have a direct analogy with the field of offshore wind. Offshore wind generators are also pretty expensive, they're capital intensive, and the solution is economic freedom. That if you believe as a speculator that it is a good idea to build offshore wind because you'll be able to sell energy into the evening peak, you have the ability to directly sell electricity to an industrial or a commercial buyer. You don't have to bring the grid into it. Okay, so it's just a simple statement of economic freedom, that nobody is forcing a high cost source upon the DISCOMs, who are often public sector organizations and who are saying, look, I don't want to get committed to a very expensive form of energy. Fine, you don't get committed. So our policy environment should be that the maker of a nuclear plant, the owner of a nuclear plant, should have the ability to directly sell, should have the freedom to directly sell to private buyers, and we keep the DISCOM out of it. Okay. Third is the problem of safety in a sense of physical security. People will think correctly that, oh, but I've got uranium inside these plants, and uranium can be used to make an atomic bomb. Now here there is a very good analogy with airports. Okay, so in aviation, we indeed have a problem with how to block crime, because attackers against planes like to pull off spectacular hijackings and blowing up a plane in the air and all that, and that is a part of the criminal justice system. But the world has fully figured this out, that you have planes made by private persons, operated by private airlines, flying in and out of private airports, and the government runs the aviation safety system inside the private airport. So that's the kind of bargain that needs to be struck. That, yeah, how will you protect that uranium? How will you protect the nuclear waste? You will have government guys, the CISF will be doing that, and the precise protocols and techniques need to be established, and that's a positive task for the government, that the government needs to write down the manual and the protocol saying, guy, you want to build a nuclear plant, you have to come to me in this fashion, I will run this kind of security system for you, and you will pay me so much, because you want it to go back on a cost sharing basis. You don't want the larger public to be burdened with this. So this is element 3 of what needs to be done, which is to think about how CISF will work nuclear. Okay, so CISF needs to understand nuclear energy the way CISF understands civil aviation. Okay, element 4, the International Atomic Energy Agency runs a global set of standards around the safety procedures and protocols and the life cycle handling of fuel and waste and all that, and India needs to sign all those treaties and become a first class participant, because otherwise the rest of the world is not going to participate and collaborate in selling fuel and selling reactors and so on into India. That there are international standards and we need to sign, and we need to agree to comply with the entire fuel cycle, the procedures and the steps that are used by the IAEA and all the member countries. Finally comes the last problem, which is civil nuclear liability. Okay, here in short the idea runs like this, that if you're driving a car and you have an accident, are you responsible or is the maker of the car responsible? Okay, and intuitively we would think that after I purchase the car it becomes my responsibility, and the maintenance of the brakes is my responsibility, is not the car maker's problem. That is not how the Indian legal system works on nuclear liability. The approach taken by the Indian state is that the vendor who sells the nuclear reactor is forever liable for all safety issues that emanate from the nuclear reactor. And I think that's not fair, that's not correct. And in any case, it is dysfunctional, because if you put up this liability, then all the vendors of the world have said that, okay, fine, in that case, I'm not keen to sell you a reactor. So I think we need to man up around this, that like all other industrial equipment, there's a handover date and then responsibility shifts to the operator. So there is a very interesting international doctrine around this. So you may say that, okay, I had a car accident, but the problem in the accident was because of a design flaw in the car. Okay, so the global arrangement is like this, that step 1, liability rests only with the operator. So if there is an accident and 100,000 people are affected, they go sue only the operator. There's one clear local person. So it's Tata Power who is running the plant, who is responsible for compensating the 100,000 people who've been adversely affected. But Tata Power and Tata Power alone has the ability to go to a foreign source of the reactor and say, you had design mistakes which caused this accident. That is their choice. So there is a legal liability, but it doesn't come from 100,000 people. It comes only from the operator, that the operator can sue saying it is because of your design defect that we had an accident. Okay, so there are these nice subtleties around the nuclear liability, and the present Indian law is not structured correctly. As long as the Indian law is structured in the way it is today, there will be no transactions. No global firm is going to sell a nuclear reactor to an Indian buyer. So that is one more piece that needs to be changed. So these are the 5 pieces that need to be changed to create conditions for Indian private people to choose. So note, I'm not dreaming that there will be a great renaissance in India and there will be so much nuclear. I'm dreaming that private people will have the right to choose. Bas. That's the most you can ask for. Under conditions of freedom, people should have choices. That will you use solar plus wind plus storage? If it makes business sense, by all means do so. Or will you believe that the evening peak is so bad that there will be good opportunities to make money with nuclear baseload? By all means do so. And it is not our job as thinkers or government policy makers to centrally plan that there will be 50,000 megawatts of nuclear. What is needed is to create conditions where private people will look at the business choices and make the right decision.
So, Ajay, we began this episode with this preamble about how we should look at nuclear differently, that it is actually damn safe. It is, I think, just by orders of magnitude, an incredibly better source of energy than everything that is mainstream today. And in this episode, what we have done is we have not made an argument for action, we have made an argument for freedom. So our argument is not that nuclear is great, oh, private people go invest in nuclear. That's not our argument. Our argument is not nuclear is great, oh, Indian states solve our power problems and go for it. We are not arguing for action. We are arguing for freedom, that this is incredible. Let's not shut it out with state action that gets in the way. Let private players decide according to their own estimations, according to their own imperatives. And then if good things are happening, let them happen. Now, my question to you is that a term that you have often used, and I've been telling you should write a book on it and we should do an episode on it, is the term invisible infrastructure. There are certain ways of thinking about organizing the relationship between the state and society that can work in a westernized country because they have that invisible infrastructure. The rule of law is much better, and they have processes honed over decades of thinking about such stuff. We don't have that invisible infrastructure. So how does this work out? Because I can see a number of things going wrong with this. Number one, the state could decide randomly that, oh, this is amazing, let us give it to a crony and only the crony will do it and no one else can enter, which is absolutely not what we want, because you want the freedom and the dynamism of a marketplace, right? Second, what could happen is that the state could get in to provide the kind of services you talk about in airports, except it is not as experienced with nuclear plants as it is with airports, and that could go awry. And third, wherever you give the state even the slightest role, it expands that role and it becomes rent seeking and it creates so much friction that everything gets ossified and nothing happens. So, how do you think about this?
These are all fair concerns, and my answer will basically be in the EIE episode, The Long Road to Change. The answer lies in knowledge and community, that we need enough people in India who think, who write, who debate, who criticize, and that will create the homeostatic process by which governments will always fumble. They'll go too much in this side, they'll go too much in that side. And what you need is a vibrant intellectual landscape where there are thinkers, there are researchers, there are people writing papers, and there are people criticizing the mainstream. Out of that, we become a better country. So I have no illusions that there's a smooth path to these 5 things. There will be a difficult path to these 5 things. Amit bhai, give us recommendations, whether nuclear or non-nuclear.
I already recommended Janvi Falke's excellent book, Atomic State. I will also recommend our AIE episode on power, my Scene Unseen episode with you and Akshay, and the 2 articles written by you and Akshay on this subject. They'll be down below in the, yeah, they're there. They're down below in the show notes. Most excellent reading. What about you? What do you recommend?
I would recommend a song which has absolutely nothing to do with nuclear. And what is amazing about the song is that it was made in 2016. See, I'm an old fogey, right? So normally my music is all ancient. So I'm amazed that I now have one song that I absolutely love, which is made as recently as 2016. It's a song called Paul by a band called Big Thief.
Magnificent. I will check it out. And since you say Paul, I am reminded of this classic song which was covered by Paul Young. I think it's originally by Marvin Gaye. It's called Wherever I Lay My Hat, That's My Home. It's a masterpiece. Where is your home, Ajay Shah? Your spiritual home, your intellectual home? Where is
Bandra
it?
East.
Hmm?
Bandra East
Bandra East is your
is
home.
home.